Jesus paints a picture here of a rich man and a poor man. The rich man is, we have to assume, although the text doesn't mention it, he's living in a fine house. After all, it has a wall around it. He lives in a fine house. He is dressed well. It says that he wears purple, and that was an expensive color in those days. He dresses well, and he feasts every single day. It's like every single day is Thanksgiving dinner for him. And the contrast is with a poor man, Lazarus. Lazarus lying at the gate. We know that he is hungry and desires even the crumbs from the rich man's table. He evidently has no home because he is living at the gate of the rich man. We have to believe that he is ill-clad, and he is just ill. He has sores on his body that the dogs come and lick. It's a very vivid picture. But in this picture that Jesus paints, there is something else, and it is the fence. It is the fence around the rich man's house which isolates him from the poor man. Now, I'm suspecting that the fence was there because the rich man didn't want to have to confront people like Lazarus. Maybe he had the fence there because he was afraid he could be robbed or he could be mugged. The picture that Jesus drew is a picture his hearers would understand because their world was a world like that. A world where rich men isolated themselves from the rest of the desperate and unsafe world. You know, we also live in a world which is desperate and unsafe. We live in a world where frightening forces are at play. The crazy availability of guns and lack of attention to mental illness mean that all of us have a familiarity with place names that we may never have paid attention to before, like Aurora, Colorado, and Newtown, Connecticut, and the Navy Yard. There are economic forces that create sweatshops just like in the time of Charles Dickens, except that maybe they're in Bangladesh. And there are social forces that go along with economic desperation playing out in various parts of our world. And political and military forces in our world create 250,000 refugees from the Syrian conflict alone. And then there are the faces of hungry millions. Homelessness has become so common, it's accepted as a natural part of our society. And sometimes we feel the world is closing in on us. And we may feel a little bit like the rich man when Lazarus, who was covered with scabs and running sores, was perched on his doorstep. I imagine the rich man saying to himself, "It is not my job to take care of Lazarus. I can't help every beggar that comes along. And this guy certainly makes my world untidy, a world that I'd like to be filled with beauty and comfort. And here we have scabby beggars lying at the gate. It almost makes me feel guilty having so much for myself." Because the world seems to be closing in on us, some people seek to deal with an unsafe world in the same way as the rich man, by seeking shelter. They turn off the TV news or stop reading the newspaper in the hopes that it will all go away. They want to live behind a gate, like the rich man in Jesus' story. And others seek to deal with an unsafe world by developing a siege mentality. They want to defend what they have so badly that the whole world becomes their enemy. And the extreme manifestation of this mentality are the survivalists who buy dried food and bullets to prepare for the coming disaster. The truth is a fact which won't disappear. We live in a world which is desperate. We live in a world which hungers. It hungers for bread and it hungers for basic necessities. In about the time it takes each of us to draw 3 breaths, another person somewhere in the world has died from lack of nutrition or tainted water. The situation is a devastating tale of the lack of human ingenuity. We also live in a world which hungers for spiritual meaning, for dignity, and for self-identity. I think one of the reasons the church is growing so quickly in Latin America and West Africa, do you know that in West Africa alone in the last 10 years there have been 2 million new United Methodists? The church is growing very rapidly because people are seeking that spiritual meaning and purpose in their life and a way of life which assists others in a world of pain and difficulty. The search for dignity and self-identity is expressed in nationalistic manifestations and ethnic consciousness around the world. In a world that's so desperate and unsafe, we need to ask ourselves whether the church is a part of the problem or part of the solution. And I think that could be answered in both ways. J. Harry Haynes, who used to head the United Methodist Committee on Relief, once shared a story of going to a very large church in Chicago, one of those big cathedral churches. And he preached and then had a discussion group, and then after worship was over, they went to the country club for a sumptuous meal. And a week later, he got a letter back from the church saying that they could do nothing to help at the current time. And in the same year, he got a check for $20,000 from a tiny little church in Georgia, 215 members. And he was curious. It was the largest gift that UMCOR had received that year. He was curious about it, and so he wrote to them and asked them about their gift. And they had said, well, they had prepared to do a capital campaign in their church, and they had raised this money, but they decided that it was much more important to assist in the important work of the Committee on Relief. And so they abandoned their capital project and sent the money to UMCOR. The church can either be a part of the solution or a part of the problem. And these two churches demonstrate that. I think if the church becomes a part of the problem instead of the heart of the solution, it may be because a church has lost or never had a clue to its mission and purpose. You know, the church functions to a large degree as a social institution, but if it wants to call itself a church, it's got to be more than a business, it's got to be more than a club, it's got to be more than a welfare agency. It has to be able to answer the why questions. The why questions. Why do we do what we do? If you look in your bulletin this week, you'll see that we're engaged in a habitat project because we know that people need decent housing. You'll see that we're about to engage in a rummage sale because people need inexpensive clothing that they can afford. You'll see that we're engaged in gathering cereal for people to people because people are hungry, that we provide a meal on Thursday night at Meals Together because people need to be fed, and that we're engaged around the world, including our involvement in Liberia. Why do we do these things? Why do we do these things? We need to be able to answer that question. We don't do these things just because we're nice people. We are nice people, but we don't do them just because we are nice people. We do them because it's part of our Christian vocation. In the scriptures, in Genesis, when God blesses Abraham, he says, I'm blessing you so that you can be a blessing to others. And that's why we're engaged in this activity, to be a blessing to others. We feed hungry people because Jesus is my sheep. We clothe people who need clothing and find housing for them because Jesus said, I was hungry, I was naked, and you took care of me. When you do it to the least of these, my brothers, you do it to me. It's important that we know the answer to those why questions. Sometimes I think that some congregations just have a muddled idea of what mission is about or a fuzzy idea, and they need to do a little bit more self-reflection. Two passages which really help clarify for me what our mission is come from first the Gospel of Matthew at the end, where Jesus is about to ascend into heaven and he's giving the Great Commission. He says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always to the close of the age. The basic purpose and mission of the church is to grow and expand and reach out and share the word. I'm amazed at how many metaphors of growth there are in the New Testament. And that is the mission of the church, to grow and spread the word, to bear fruit. And do remember that fruit contains the seeds of new plants. We are to grow and bear fruit. And when the church stops growing in numbers or in depth of faith, in commitment or in compassion, it ceases to be the church. One of the most basic purposes of the church is to reach out and share its experience of faith with others. The second passage I would call to your attention is from Galatians 2. When Paul goes up to Jerusalem to talk to the pillars of the church, he lays before them what he's been preaching, just to make sure he's preaching the right thing. And they affirm what he's been preaching, but they add one comment. Only they would have us remember the poor, which very thing I was eager to do. Only they would have us remember the poor. Our mission should never be insensitive to the physical needs of persons. If a lack of clarity about our mission is a problem, so is a statistical mentality. It's difficult when we begin to talk about large numbers. Our lives are lived one-to-one, and so we develop compassion fatigue when we hear figures like 250,000 refugees. I'm convinced, though, that if we look into the eyes of individuals who are hurt or hungry or lost, we will know the answer. What is our mission? I wonder if the rich man ever looked into Lazarus' eyes. I suspect he averted his gaze. When we look into the eyes of someone who is hurt or hungry or lost, what do we see? How do we live in an unsafe world? The truth is, the world has always been unsafe, and Christians have always had a special insight into living in such a world. The guideline is very simple, but it's very difficult. It's not easy. Jesus said, we have to forget ourselves, we have to take up our cross every day, and we have to follow him. Amen. As we prepare for a time of prayer, I would like you to remember in your prayers Rachel DeFantis. This is a young child that we have prayed for before, and the medical need continues. And I want to take a microphone and come out into the congregation for just a second. And Harry Featherstone would like to share a word.
It'll be difficult, but I'll get through it. Donna and I have experienced 7 months or more of problems with our health. My health, Donna, not yours. The church has come into our home probably 20, 30, 40 times in 7 months. And I wanted to say that the power of where you're sitting and the power of our Methodist Church is the power of what's been described for the last 20 minutes, I guess. Okay? And we'd like to thank you, and thank you from the depths of our hearts for what you give it to us.